What we're going to cover today is where waste typically shows up in marketing and also digital environments. And what's really important to think about is that the word marketing, sometimes people might go, oh, that won't be suitable for me. But this webinar and the tips are here is anybody that physically sits in an office environment. So it's also suitable for knowledge workers. A lot of the examples I'll be giving will be suitable, say, for accountants, for people in HR, for people in operations. So they're all very, very relevant. And then we'll go through exactly how waste, some practical tools and approaches to actually reduce marketing waste. And then we're going to go through the questions and answers afterwards. So 10 hours a week. I always do this slide at the start because 10 hours a week, it sounds like, but when you put that into a whole month, you're going to get 40 hours a month. That's a huge amount of time. So to put that into context, right, that's 8 rounds of golf. Obviously, it depends on how good a golfer you are. It depends what course you're playing on. Or if you're not into golf, it could be 4 Netflix series, right? For the bingers amongst us. Or it could be actually a return flight to Australia-ish. You kind of get from Dublin to Sydney and is back to Abu Dhabi. So you kind of like 1.25. That's a huge amount of time. And that's how much waste on average we find when we go in and work with companies from a marketing perspective. We always find a minimum of 40 hours per person per month or 10 hours per person per week. So just to give you a little bit of background about my journey to lean, because a lot of people have got a misconception that you can't apply lean to marketing. And when people go, what do you do? And I say, I apply lean to marketing. They go, what? No, you sure? Is that not for manufacturing? So it's the typical response that I get. So what I want to do is bring you back to 1998, because that's where I first started practicing lean. And even if you want to remember, for those of us who might remember those times, remember the Goo Goo Dolls' Iris? That was a song around that time, if people have good memories in terms of music. There was a couple of other songs like Shania Twain, as it, You're Still the One. That's the kind of the period that we're talking about. So almost 30 years ago. And my very first exposure to lean, even though it wasn't called lean, was when I was working in Dublin, and I was working in a restaurant called the Shack in Temple Bar, if any of you remember it. It's no longer open. It closed about 4 or 5 years ago. But the owner of that particular restaurant was a gentleman called David Ellis. And he was quite unusual because a lot of restaurants are run by chefs, where he was actually a businessman running restaurants. And he was amazing in terms of empowering us and to think about continuous improvement. And what he used to do was he used to ask us to look at the plate at the end of the time the person had eaten it. So you take the plate, because we were waitressing, you take the plate away, you'd go down to the kitchen and you'd look at how much food is on the plate. If there was too much food, it meant the portions were too big. If there was too little food, it meant the portions weren't big enough. And he constantly gauged that. And it might change from winter to summer. But the big thing that he looked at was the garnish. And the garnish, for example, back then used to be the likes of grapes. But grapes were really expensive. And we were noticing that there was nobody ate their garnish. Everybody left the grapes on the plate. And if you actually worked out the expense to that, it was working out to close to almost £1,000 a month of buying that amount of grapes that people weren't eating. And he'd always say to us, where's the waste? Where's the waste? Where's the waste? He would also empower us when we're setting up the tables in the restaurant. There must be a better way. He'd say, there must be a quicker way that you can do this. We're making coffees. There must be a better way. So he constantly challenged us to think of better ways to engage with customers. He implemented CRM so that we had information. He'd put in a loyalty, program. And all of this stuff didn't even exist in the States. And this was all in 1998. So that was my first real, I suppose, taste of operational excellence, continuous improvement. And then that kind of thinking stayed with me from every job then that I actually had. And that thinking is there has to be a better way. And that's essentially what lean is, right? There has to be a better way so that you can feel empowered to think about it. So in terms of like a quick summary of my career, I've been 30 years in B2B marketing, always manufacturing, construction, kind of large complex industries. I spent 12 years in Australia. And in particular in Australia, the mindset of there has to be a better way is in everything that you do. And then when I came back to Ireland, I struggled a little bit because I found that actually, this was after the crash, that people were still really stuck in doing things that the way they always wanted to do it. So I wanted to find a tribe. I wanted to find a tribe of people that wanted to look at things different, to think of, right, what about if we made a small improvement here? What would that look like? And I had worked in metal sheet manufacturing in Australia. So I wanted to find similar style industries that I would enjoy working in and enjoy the people to work with. So that's when I went off and did my black belt in Lean Six Sigma. I started my green belt in 2012 and then finished the black belt in 2014. And that's essentially when I discovered I was a lean undercover agent throughout my whole career. Because all of the tools that we were taught in terms of value stream mapping, 3S, 5S, seeing the likes of shadow boards, understanding what Gemba actually meant, Kaizen, all of these things, it made me feel so alive. I actually felt, oh my God, this is how I naturally want to feel. But out of the 60 people that I would have met in that environment, every single one of them were either production managers or engineers. Nobody was from a service-based environment. And I'd go to conferences and people go, why are you here? Like, heck, you don't do that. You couldn't apply lean to marketing. And then I got my big break when I was very lucky to join Smurfit Kappa. And Smurfit Kappa, although they don't call it lean, they call it operational excellence. And everything about, if anybody's been to any of the Smurfit Kappa plants globally, my role was a global role. So I spent a lot of my time in Colombia, in Mexico, in all over Europe. And their plants are something else. Like, there used to be a phrase that if you can't eat your breakfast off one of their corrugators, the plant is not clean enough. Because back in the 60s and 70s, they used to cook bacon on the heat of the corrugators, right? So it was really brilliant to see how everything they did from an operational perspective was applied to all facets of the business. And the programs that I ran were applying best in practice operation excellence to marketing around the world. And then I joined Boxever. And Boxever at the time, everybody said to me, what are you leaving Smurfit Kappa for? But it's because I wanted to understand more about AI. I wanted to understand more about digital. And Boxever was the darling of the industry. They were ranked number 7 by Forbes, ahead of Netflix in series of the best use of AI globally in 2017. They sold in 2021. But in 2019, I started my own business, Clarity, specializing in applying lean to marketing. But a lot of the times we don't use the language lean with marketer because it scares the living bejesus out of them, right? So we will change the language. So if I go in and go, oh, let's look at waste, people go, oh, that's a negative word. They don't actually understand what it truly means. But we've seen a massive sea change in the last 2 years. Part of that is, this whole lean thinking and the 2-second lean approach with, the guy, Ryan Tierney, and the guys in admin sheds and, all over Toronto, all the brilliant work that these companies are doing to bring lean everywhere. And we've never been busier in terms of people wanting to understand how to apply lean to marketing. It's not just small business, it's really big business as well. So we have created what we call the Lean Marketers Toolkit, and that toolkit has got 50 different cards of how you'd apply lean to marketing. So an example of this would be the typical working day that a marketer would actually have can range from everything from 3 meetings a day. You might receive on average 117 emails with 40 emails sent. You've got about 146 different phone alerts that are constantly distracting you. And on average, people check their phones 63 times to glance at your device. So the effect that's having on attention management in terms of flow, in terms of actually focusing on getting a whole things ready, it has never been harder to work in marketing. And what we see constantly is what we call the moments, the frustration spikes. There's around 15 of those a day, which is a lot more than there used to be. So if you think of marketing almost like a factory line, the amount of issues that stop and start because of these tokens, there's no sequence anymore in terms of easy flow to get work done. So it's taking 7 to 8 times longer, which is causing a huge amount of burnout. 66% of knowledge workers, it's at the highest. So back in COVID, when people thought that everybody was burnt out, this is even higher now than COVID. And that's a massive issue, because when you've got people disengaged, you've got people not wanting to think of better ways to do things. So it's more important than ever that we actually look for how waste is showing up. This is backed up by a huge amount of reports. The Marketing Meetup is a fabulous organization where they actually ask directly how marketers are feeling. And the 3 big things, it doesn't just have to be a marketer, right? It's time scarcity. There's never enough time. That is what we hear time and time again for people. There's never enough time. There's constantly resource constraints and there's process friction. But Steve and I were chatting before this, when we ask people about time scarcity and we go, well, how long does it take you to do that? Nobody times how long things take in a marketing environment or a service environment compared to manufacturing, where everything is timed, right? So it's really interesting to see that what worked really well in manufacturing, service-based departments haven't actually quite caught up on that. And the fundamentals are there for us each to learn. So what we're going to be showing you now is how you apply time to actually reduce that so that you end up with 10 hours. So the 8 wastes. So the 8 waste typical what we're going to go here is Tim Woods. So I'm just going to go back there for 2 seconds. So for all of you, our lean practitioners joining today, again, we're using the typical Tim Woods framework. I know that some of the companies use a couple of other frameworks in terms of identifying waste, but what we've done here is we're using the traditional ones because again, it's linked back to, I suppose, the more academic rigor of the green belt and the black belt as such. So the first one is transport. And I might actually just even stop and ask, does anyone have any questions so far, or did anybody want to ask anything in particular before we get into bringing you through the big 8 wastes?
I think our chat is fairly clear. Somebody just asked, are we going to post this video? It'll be up on the Dublin Network YouTube channel. So you can all log in there. And you can see some of the older ones, and we'll post some of the even older ones over time. But I think we're all good with Tim Woods. It's great to see this in a marketing context.
Okay, so transport. And what I found is that actually using Tim Woods for this, the transport element, obviously in a manufacturing environment, is so much easier to understand, right? And when you apply the word transport to marketing, it almost trips people up. Whereas if you were to lead with motion, people will understand motion much easier as a waste rather than transport. But as I said, because we're keeping to Tim Woods, we'll start with transport anyway. And what we mean by transport here is the unnecessary movement of things like files, data, documents, materials. So an example here is, and I see it time and time and time again, and sometimes it's like, does everyone know it's 2026? Like that it's not 2014. The amount of people that are still not working in real-time collaboration is bonkers, like absolute bonkers. So I would say 90% of companies that we work with, and these are big, big, big companies, are still sending 17 versions of the same file to each other rather than actually sticking to the likes of SharePoint and working on it collaboratively to update on things. They constantly send the file. So it could be the Excel, it could be the PowerPoint, it could be the Word document. So an example on marketing would be a brief, right? So a brief, like, a brief for a really big ad campaign potentially. And literally there could be 17 rounds of that brief going around without actually understanding version control. Now we find that a lot of the tech companies are much better at that because they're using Google Docs or Google Sheets, and they're much more used and they're faster and they're more agile in terms of working that way. But interestingly, people have never standardized how to work in that. So I've never once seen a standardized operating procedure in terms of how you collaborate and comment in real-time documentation. It never exists. And it should do, because it's something that we do all of the time, but we just never have documented how to do it. So people try to figure out, oh, should I do this? How does this comment work? If I comment, does it end up in their inbox? Again, you need to standardize it. So Tom Hughes, Gemba Docs, is the man to help you standardize something like this. The next example that we see is moving data between multiple systems that don't integrate. So endless copying, pasting between platforms. Where we're seeing this massively at the moment is from ChatGPT or from Claude or from whatever. The amount of time that people are spending in terms of copying from ChatGPT into their Word document or into Excel without using Canvas function of ChatGPT or without building an integration to do it quicker. Or it could be, say, for example, email, say, for example, MailChimp or any email marketing systems. The amount of times that people are downloading information from one place, uploading to another without actually building that integration. So this is all the unnecessary movement of things that, there's quicker and simple ways around that. Uploading and downloading the same file repeatedly. I do this all the time myself. So like I upload a file and they go, where is that again? And instead I just go back to try and download it again, rather than just going back to the original place that it is. And all of these things take time. So like it might sound like it's only 1 or 2 minutes, but when you've got a team of 42 people doing that, bang, that's an hour of the whole organization's time just gone. If you were to cost out that the average wage might be, let's say, between 40,000 up to 120,000, all of a sudden that has cost you literally 800 to 2 grand just because you're not doing the file properly. So these are the things to start thinking about, going, how is my way of working impacting the time of the organization, and where do I lead in terms of being best practice on this? And then last but not least, typical transport, which is walking across the office to fetch a printout from a machine that rarely works. Now, this is not to be confused with, oh my God, you must stand at your desk all day and never move. Obviously, from a transport perspective here, it's because the machine doesn't work. But if you are, from a motion perspective, if you are liaising with colleagues and you're going over and you're actually building really good relationships with them in person and having a chat over the water cooler type thing, of course, that's really good for engagement. What we're saying is, don't keep on going back to the same machine when it's out of paper, then walking around and not leaving it better for the next person. So the next example is inventory. So inventory is probably the one I would say that happens most in marketing. Inventory, emotion, and probably skills, underutilization are the three that pop up most from a waste perspective. So backlog of marketing requests waiting to be processed. So briefs or content updates stacked up with no clear status or owner. We are doing a really, we'll be publishing a really interesting interview with Orla Bibby from Clearhill, if anybody's been up to Clearhill, how she triages work. And that example, even though it's marketing, the whole organization is going to use it. And she has saved her team 22 hours a week using that process. She's got 3 in the team, so work that back, that's between 7 to 8 hours each that she's actually created, and that's on planner boards, right? So it's essentially a digital Kanban board in terms of what they've done there. Other ways are campaign drafts that never go final. So I don't know how many of you, even if you look at the way that documents are named, version 10, final, sitting forgotten in SharePoint. It happens all the time. And then you're trying to find, well, what is the actual final? Because when you go into the final folder, there's 7 of them in there. You still don't know what the final is. So again, just mismanagement in terms of how you label inventory from a marketing perspective. Software licenses paid, but never used. And that would, on average, about between 30 to 38% of marketing budgets are now spent on marketing technology. And on average, I would say from my experience of, auditing over 50 companies in the last 6 years, I would say about 25% of that is not being utilized. So that's 13% adoption on average that you get. So that can sit in inventory. Some companies from a lean perspective might actually put that into tech underutilization. They stick that in skills, the S side of Tim Woods, but we put it in inventory here. And that's a huge thing. So again, the amount of companies that I actually ask to give me their overall MarTech overview and how many times have you actually used this particular software, and are you aware that this software also does these 3 other things that this piece of tech does as well? So the lack of understanding of the crossover in tech is huge waste there as well. And then reports generated regularly but never read. I worked with one company in 2022 and we worked out, and this is quite a small marketing department. They had a marketing department of 4 people. The company it was about 75 people in it, really clever founders, like a really, really clever best practice style company. But the management team kept on wanting reports. They assumed that reports were at a press of a button, like visual dashboards. They didn't realize how long it took for marketing to generate some of these reports. Nobody asked. Marketing never timed themselves. And we worked out that the time that it took was equivalent to 51,000 a year of misused reporting. 51,000 a year, just in that's of a team of 4 people. So again, really understanding how does this report actually inform decisions? And the issue that happens there is, sure, that's the way we always did it. Have you asked your board what do they want from a reporting perspective? Have you asked your executive team what's most important? Because most people fall into the trap of, oh, the board wants it. But it actually, is that the information that they actually want? And it's asking those questions. I'm doing a 5 why on it. Motion. So I love this one, right? Searching through endless inboxes, folders, or Slack threads, scrolling through 200 messages just to find the file. Again, that's what I call the digital treasure hunt. Switching between 12 different apps or browser tabs to complete one super tab. We all do it, right? People not using simple things like bookmarks or stream decks to quickly find them to place. It's just, it's unusual it still happens considering the amount of solutions that are out there to decrease this. Navigating approval chains with far too many steps and not agreeing what the approval step is to begin with. So one of the issues that we find here is that people aren't using RACIs or DACIs. So RACI would have been obviously, who's responsible, who's the approver, who's a contributor, who's staying informed, typical project management. But we've seen now that people are moving to DACI, so the R changes to a D. So instead of responsible, they're actually saying this is the decision maker, or the driver. This is the person that is the driver, and that goes back to total ownership and that whole side of lean as well. Or walking around to track someone down for an answer instead of pinging them a message. Then we have waiting. So waiting happens all the time. So waiting for a sign off on a 2-line social post. I worked with one organization and Again, really, really brilliant organization, but sometimes it took 6 weeks to get a social post signed off. 6 weeks, because it had to go through legal, it had to go through compliance, it had to go through all of those. And it's just because they never value streamed out what that process actually was and at what stage could they get there quicker. And nobody knew it was 6 weeks because nobody communicated that. They just said, Asher, that's the way it's always been. So again, the second we hear that's the way it's always been, we go, let us at it. How can we actually, do a deeper dive down here and figure out why? Refreshing your Outlook to see if the attachment has finally arrived. Again, you're waiting, sitting through IT downtime while systems crawl or crash, and then standing around for access to printers, meeting rooms, or data that you need to keep working. So all of these are examples of waiting in real life. Overproduction happens all the time in marketing, but because it's not visible, people don't allocate value to it. And that's what's such a massive issue, right? Whereas when you've got overproduction in a factory floor, you're seeing a massive amount of inventory stocked. You're seeing basically then transport and motion being affected in terms of moving that inventory. You don't see that in the same way in digital environments. And examples of this would be building 50 slide decks when the exec team only wanted 1 chart and 2 slides. Because people are trying to impress, spending 6 hours on something when really you only needed to spend an hour on it, creating 12 campaign variants just in case. So the second we hear the just in case, you're like, oh, go, no, give me 1. And then if that didn't work, then let us come back to you rather than the 12 just in case, because time is money. And again, that's the biggest issue that people don't understand from a digital environment. Again, generating reports that nobody opens, or not even looking at how you're tracking whether or not people open it. So not adding analytics to it internally to see, do people even want this information? Or sharing updates with large groups who don't need the detail. Again, the CC. So how many times have you CC'd somebody who don't need to be on it, right? But just because you're trying to cover yourself, again, that's overproduction in terms of involving too many people. Overprocessing. So this is the biggest one that I fall into. I love things to look a particular way. So I overprocess things and I overshine them that's actually not needed to that level. And that's where I have to continue pulling myself back and go, hang on, probably 80% is okay here. It's not life-threatening. So reformatting the same numbers into Excel, PowerPoint and Tableau without using integrations. And an example that I showed actually at the Gemba Summit was we showed in real time, here's your PowerPoint, here's your Excel. By using one tiny little integration app, you can make that Excel chart look amazing within 7 seconds. And a lot of people still aren't using some of the integrations into PowerPoint. Instead, they're copying, they're pasting, they're changing the colors, they're doing all of these things that could take 45 minutes when you can do it in less than 2 minutes. Duplicating data across multiple systems as well, requiring 5 people to approve something that only needs 1. That goes back to the whole DAISY side of things and not being clear on who the driver and the approver is, and spending hours fixing fonts and layouts for a report nobody reads, or spending loads of time on a PowerPoint because you want it to look nice to impress the good people of the Lean Dublin network, like what I did last night on this particular session as well. So again, we all do these wastes ourselves, but it's about seeing it in others so that you can actually call it and go, right, what's a better way of doing that? Defects. So defects happen an awful lot actually in marketing. So things like the 404 page on a website, or clicking through to a link and going, oh, I wasn't able to register for this, easier, can you send it to me? And then it's like 3 emails instead of 1, just quick link. Campaign emails going out with broken links, software releases shipped with bugs spotted instantly by users. Emails going out with spelling mistakes can often happen because they don't have a test. So again, the manufacturing environment, you always actually have, either a defect percentage or you've got a testing environment. That very rarely happens in marketing. And, you're only adding an extra little bit of time so that you're saving yourself a lot of time in the long run. Miscommunication between teams leading to duplication and reworks. And then we come to the skills utilization, which links in very clearly with that over processing as well. So what I find constantly on this is highly skilled staff tied up with low value admin. So when you ask companies to actually do a map of value versus non-value and you start doing a proper VSM, they don't know what the difference is. So it's about re-explaining to them what value is versus non-value. And considering marketing is all about knowing what the customer wants, I find it fascinating that marketing is not the shining light at Lean, because it should be. Because everything about Lean is what adds value versus non-value to the end customer. So data scientists spending hours reformatting spreadsheets instead of actually analysing insights. They're spending more time in admin than rather using the core skill that they have, which is actually understanding what the insight is telling us to make better decisions. Teams not ask for ideas that could save hours of work, because again, that's the way we've always done it. Not training staff to use tools they already have access to, or people left out of decisions where their expertise could have added real value. So that's where we see kind of the most examples of skills underutilization. So that's in summary, wasted everywhere. So how are you going to see it going forward? And the three biggest offenders that we find are meetings, multitasking, and miscommunication. So we just went through a huge amount there in terms of how waste show up. But what we're going to show you now is a couple of examples, and these affect everybody. So everybody is in meetings, everybody's in multitasking, and everybody gets affected by miscommunication. I'm going to spend more time on the meetings today rather than the multitasking and the other ones. And if anybody's more interested, maybe, Steve, we might do another session later on in the year that goes into more detail about multitasking. We do some really good interactive sessions on that, and about communication, say this instead of that to stop the approval loops and that type of stuff. But for the time that we have today, I'm just going to really focus on meetings. So I'm going to ask a question before I get in. How many meetings on average do you think most people in service-based environments or office-based environments are in a week?
You can try your answers in the chat if you want. I'll call them out. 20, 15, 30 or 40, 10, 20, too many. 20 or 30 hours a week. Who's that? What?
Yeah, if you're in a management position, you often are, right? Yeah. Meeting after meeting after meeting. Have any of you ever seen, actually, I must add this to this deck, the way your brain goes after 3 meetings? Have you ever seen that chart of what your brain looks like? I'll send it actually. It's fascinating. It's like a proper, really deep piece of research. And basically, your brain starts off all lovely and gorgeous. And then after 3 hours of Zoom meetings back to back, it literally completely changes the color, and you don't have the same level of concentration, which is why we obviously get Zoom fatigue. But anyway, let's talk about meetings, right? So on average, there's 62 meetings per month per employee. 62 meetings per month, right? So divide that by 4, and you've got between 12 to 15. On average, there's 45 meetings in length. So if we work that out, that's 46.5 hours per month in meetings. That alone would get you back to Australia, would get you to Australia and back, right? Or your 8 rounds of golf, or your Netflix, whatever you want. 46.5 hours per month in meetings, and over 50% of them are wasted, right? But they're not productive. You're either going because you're CC'd, or there hasn't been proper agenda set, or there hasn't been proper actions agreed, or you could have done it another way, is what we're saying. But on average, 50% of meetings are wasteful. And that's through Atlas and Gallup that do a huge amount of research on this. So if you're wasting 23 hours per month on meetings, that's 5.6 hours a week that you're wasting. That's almost a day. So have any of you ever done this in terms of how much that meeting cost? So when we go back to tracking time, this is an example of some companies, that say, imagine if we actually tracked this meeting and what the cost of it was. I did this once in Smurfit Kappa when we had a lot of agencies on it. We had a number of agencies, and we're talking about we're talking about thousands of what that meeting cost. So what it means is get the most out of it. Don't just assume that people's time is free. How do you get the most out of people's time and respect it? Because their inputs are just like a manufacturing environment in terms of your core ingredients or your core materials going in. So if you were to work that out in terms of, even so, for example, Toronto's got 6 people on this meeting, how much is that costing them to attend this masterclass? So how do we reduce waste and reclaim time? So this is where we go into our toolkit, which is the Lean Thinking for Marketers toolkit. And as I mentioned, there's over kind of 50 tools in there, but the tools that we're showing you today are all around asynchronous video, meeting scheduling, meeting preparation, and follow-up and actions. And using these 4 tools alone will save you between 7 and 8 hours a week in terms of meetings and doing meetings better. So The first one is asynchronous video. Asynchronous video is a word that I've really struggled pronouncing. That and anaesthetist are two words that I've had to practice and practice. So asynchronous video is a horrendous word. It basically means recorded content that you can view at different time. So, so such as Vidyard or Loom. So I might just ask for a share of hands. It's not in real time. You're recording your screen and then you're sending that as a link to somebody so that they can actually open us. So it's brilliant for people in different time zones, etc. But who here has either used Loom or Vidyard? Maybe we get a show of hands in the comments. Steve, if you can let me know. I can't see everyone, but if you can maybe let me know roughly how many people have used.
Anybody who has, just chuck it in the chat. Not getting much here.
Okay, so if
yes.
you only get one thing from today's session, everyone needs to be using Loom, right? Loom is probably the cheapest. So we personally in Clarity, we use Vidyard only because we've been using it since 2021. Because we've been using it for so long, we get cheaper rates with them. Per person, I think Vidyard now is something like 69 per person, whereas Loom, I think, is something like 18, right? It is game changing. So essentially, I don't know if this is actually going to, I don't know if you're going to be able to hear this. Hi, Helen. Hope you're really
Can
you hear that? And thanks again for your time last week, and also to Petra for showing me around the Essential Song Droga 5 venue. It's just so perfect. Here's a little bit more information about the event. And attached is this just kind of a briefing document, what I've just been using as a catch-all of information about it. So just as a recap again, the whole ethos of the Marketing Meetup, which is a community that started in the UK back in 2016, is all around being positively lovely to people. And it was started by a guy called Joe Glover. So that's an example of me looking to with the Centre Song, looking to use their space to host an event for marketers. And if I had to write a big long email explaining all of that, and she wanted to show it to the CEO to understand what it actually was. So I wrote quickly what the briefing document was, talked to us, sent it to her. I could see exactly by the analytics how interested people were. And the feedback that I got back was, this is so clear, it's really great, thank you very much. So you don't use it for all communications, but you decide, where do I need to send something to somebody rather than have a meeting about it? And also in terms of different learning styles, it works really well. So for example, if I'm sending an agenda to a client or a pre-read, I will always say, right, for our meeting at 2 o'clock, whatever, here's the pre-read a couple of days in advance. They can just literally press play while they're making themselves a cup of tea and they know exactly what's going on. So it's so easy because you're always thinking about the next person. How do I make it easy for them to understand? But particularly in marketing, when you're giving feedback on briefs, when you use words such as change this tone, I don't like this word, I don't like the design of this, sometimes people get offended by it. When you accompany it with voice and going, hey, I can completely see why you're going down the route of that, because yes, we agreed that was tone of voice before. However, this particular target audience won't actually align with that. So can you do this instead? So you're talking to your feedback. You don't have to have a meeting then with your feedback to bring them through it. So it saves us massive amount of time. But in terms of, the benefits, it's 10 times quicker than typing. You can replace at least 35 of your meetings with asynchronous video. And there's over 40 million users across all industries. So nearly all tech companies use asynchronous video to work. Whereas it's interesting, the companies that maybe are a little that bit older, and I find kind of on Microsoft essentially, it's almost explaining going back to 2000 when people first started using email. It's now getting them used to, you no longer need to use email for everything. You can use asynchronous video for something instead. And probably so it's as simple as what some people think is, oh my God, I'm recording a video. You literally just press a button on your desktop, off it goes, it records your screen, and you can decide whether or not you want your screen or your screen and camera on it. So for example, I work in a lot of international time zones. I do a lot of work with Australia. So if I'm working at 2 o'clock in the morning, I don't need my camera on because the chances are I'm probably in my pajamas, right? But I'm still working away. So I just don't put my camera on, but they can hear my voice to it. Whereas if it's meeting with a client that hasn't met me before, I'm going, hi, how are you? I'll put my camera on and then go small. So it depends. You decide in the relationship you have with that person in terms of how you actually use it. And in terms of the adoption for video messaging, we're already here. So like we've all named conservatives that are not on board are going to be the late majorities. But basically it's gone past the early adopter stage. So many people are already using Loom. So I would recommend that you go to loom.com, look at the way all the different use cases that it can be used, and it's great. But the misconceptions that generally happen is 25% of people have a fear of being recorded, which does not make sense, because if you attend a Zoom or a team calls, that's already being recorded, right? Plus there's security around it, so they can't send it here, there and everywhere. You can just add a security link to it that they have to put a password to it, which is why some people have issue with privacy concerns. But again, that's not an issue. The fear of making mistakes while recording happens all the time. It's called being human. So the amount of times that I'll and ah and all of that stuff, it's fine. You're supposed to be human, right? If you're in a meeting with them, you'd be and ahhing as it is. So that's grand. It's not supposed to be this amazing, kind of production that should be on Game of Thrones type thing. It's just normal being a human. Technical challenge is learning how to use it. It is so simple to use. It is simpler than Teams to use, right? The bandwidth of sending large video files, that's the biggest misconception, because it doesn't come in a video file. It comes in a little link. You play it, bang, you see the little tile, and it's so easy to watch. And then having to look good on camera. Again, you don't have to look good on camera. Just turn your camera off. No one's looking at you anyway, right? They don't really care. They're actually listening to what you're talking about and looking at the screen of the document that you're talking about. So this is how we saved 7 hours last week using Vidyard, or as I mentioned, Zoom. So an example here is a project status update. Previously at the end of the week, what we would typically do is we'd have a project plan. We recommend this to our clients as well, such as large construction consultancies would do a lot of this type of thing as well, where every Friday afternoon they'll spend loads of time doing an update on this is how your project is going, and then they'll do this big long email, and they don't even know if the client's actually watching it. We did a huge amount of research in this with some of our clients, and we found that the clients were not actually reading the big long email, but it was taking the team, the quant surveyors, between an hour to 2 hours of actually doing it. So instead, they now use Loom instead, right? So for example, it takes 7 minutes, and you're no longer like, oh no, I've got to do that report. You've got the project plan on screen, you're walking them through what's happened, and Loom then actually catches what you're saying, and you can add that as the body of your email as well. So we do 5 of them on average, depending on what the clients are. So that's a time saving of 38 minutes. Feedback and design briefs, which I mentioned before, if I had to type it out and go to the brief and then back to the typing and then let this and page 32 or slide 45, line 2, doing all that type of stuff, that takes a huge amount of time. It can now be replaced by video in 10 minutes. So again, saving 20 minutes. If you do 5 of those, you've got a much bigger saving. Proposal summaries, that's a massive one for us. So like if we're sending out proposals, we would have done an email going, this is the proposal and blah, 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 blah. Now we do a quick video to it. So we've gotten it down to 30 minutes to 6 minutes. Say we do one of those a week, that's 24 minutes. Training course overviews, again, when particularly L&D, tell me exactly what the learning outcomes are for this. We bring them through our training plan. We tell them why it's really good, what other participants liked in it. We used to would have taken us 20 minutes to write the email to describe it. Now it takes us 6 minutes. If we do 2 of those, you can see 28 minutes saved. Budget review and submission. So anybody in accounting, this is brilliant for, because you're explaining exactly maybe where the GL code needs to be, or what the budget was for, or what the change was, or what the ROI needs to be expected. And it's finicky when you're in Excel trying to say this and say that and check the numbers. Now you just talk to it. You get that down from 75 minutes to 15 minutes. And last but not least, board updates. Board members love it. Love, 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 love it. So your usual time would be 50 minutes, get it down to 10 minutes. So all up, that is how we save just 7.5 minutes on a synchronous video alone, right? So there's so many different use cases that you can use it for. We're not saying you replace every single meeting with a synchronous video. We're saying you think about what meetings could be replaced with a synchronous video, because it goes back to communication. And then other tools like scheduling, preparation, and follow-up capture. So it's still amazing the amount of time that people waste meeting scheduling. Hey, would you be available at 10 o'clock? Well, I'm not sure. Let me look at my diary. Just send them a calendar link so that you can see in real time what each other's availability is like. Meeting preparation, sending agendas beforehand, and then meeting actions and follow-up. So particularly in Ireland, actually, if I go back to meeting preparation, I would say 90% of meetings are not prepared for, compared to Germany, the Nordics. We did a project with Enterprise Ireland where we interviewed 20 really senior decision makers in the Nordics about how they find working with Irish companies. And they all said that one of their biggest frustrations was the lack of an agenda. that they just literally flounced into the room, goes, sure, let's have a chat, and that they didn't follow up on actions. So to meeting tools like Fathom, listen to your conversations, they summarize your tasks, right? Or you could use Granola or Fireflies. There's a load of tools out there. But what are you doing with those actions? Just because you've recorded them, it's about how do you get those actions quickly into an action capture so that you're able to progress what was discussed and go back to the next meeting. So here's an example of what we do in Fathom. And we don't use Fathom just for meetings. We use Fathom for a lot of mentoring and for delivery of strategy. So we'll deliver a strategy, we'll attach the Fathom, and then we basically say, these are the actions that you need to agree, and they can log in and see exactly what all of the actions are, or they can actually log in, see what the takeaways were, what the improvements were, and what the next steps were, and then they can go in and actually see the meeting itself and can go back to it. So when we're mentoring or onboarding new people, we brought on 3 people in the last, in the last 6-7 months. So it's been a massive game changer for my time, because then I'm able to go, right, this is an example of whatever tool that we're teaching, or how we do strategy, or whatever it might be. And then the person can go back and see it time and time and time again without having to come back and ask me 101 questions on it. Because the biggest problem in communication is the illusion that has taken place. So if we look at how it basically saves us time, again, we've got here internal meeting summaries and distribution. What used to take 30 minutes before now takes us 5 minutes. Meeting summaries and used to take 2 hours, now gets down to 30 minutes. So all up there with one-to-one mentoring, we save 2.5 hours. So in summary, asynchronous video, roughly 7 hours. Meeting scheduling, 1.5 hours. Meeting follow-up and actions, 2.5. So it saves over 11 hours of how we actually work. So really the next steps are what meetings add value, which can be replaced in other ways. How can you do meetings better so that they're adding more value? And then what could you and your team do with that reclaimed time? And that's it. We 38 minutes, Steve. There's a couple more things here. I've got additional tools to try out. I don't know if you guys are using, deep work. I'd love to do a session with you on it sometime, because again, that saves us on average 5 to 6 hours because of the lack of distractions. Using voice to text. I assume everyone that uses ChatGPT uses the voice component of it, but apparently not. The amount of people that didn't know that they're still not using it. Whisper flow into the typing, Voice Pal to do your ghostwriter, Whisper Memo when you're on the go, amazing. Stream Decks, again, I know Toronto and anybody in the 2-second in community are a huge fan of Stream Decks. Notebook LM by Google, amazing for insights and to really quick them up. Perplexity Labs for your research, and then Jasper AI for small marketing teams is brilliant. And for more information, please reach out. We do have a WhatsApp group. We have got 7 members in it so far. February is when we're really launching all of these things. Next week, we're launching our YouTube channel, and the first one that's going out is the interview we did with Orla Bibby, where she shows how she, as I mentioned, she saves the 8 hours per person in terms of workflow, and it's really good because it's behind the scenes of how they do it, and she shows her planner board and how they built it and how they triage work. And then if anybody ever wants to work with us, we do audits. We've got our toolkit, training and workshops, and just find me on LinkedIn, connect with me on LinkedIn, because we'll be posting lots of tips as well. And that is it. So now over to you in terms of Q&A.
Brilliant. That flew by, and we've only 7 minutes left. So if anybody wants to throw any questions into the chat, I know Diana has an awful lot more of stuff that she could have shared with us today based on the Gemba Summit and so on. So there might be enough there for if anybody has an interest. Similar to the workshop that we're organising with Noel Hennessy, this sounds like a space that could actually fill up a workshop as well. In the chat, I'm amazed here. Kira says, my record is 27 meetings in one day. I don't know what state you're in after that. Maybe you're in A&E or something after that. But
I think so.
oh my God.
Yeah,
really...
15 minutes, 15 minutes, 15 minutes. Crazy. Yeah.
Oh, sweet God. That's just not sustainable.
No.
There should be a health warning on meetings, I think.
Yeah, that's manufacturing for you, though.
Yeah. I mean, some of the stuff that you said there, and I just picked up, I suppose, informally over the years. The first time I spoke to Paul Akers, I was trying to get Paul to do this talk, and he finally came on there a couple of years ago. But he communicated to me via LinkedIn with a voice message. And I was thinking, how did he do that? And a little tip for everybody, if you're using LinkedIn on your phone, just hit the microphone and talk into it and then hit go. And instead of having to type in a LinkedIn message. And that's the way Paul and Ryan Tierney has started to do that as well on WhatsApp. It's just a voice message. It's not, he doesn't type. He told me as well, I think last year, he doesn't do email anymore. So Ryan has, you don't get Ryan by email typically. You get him by WhatsApp, and you get a voicemail response. Fantastic session from Caroline. Kira, they use Teams to record sessions. Deirdre, same, use Teams. Adam has capped his meetings to 4 hours per day. Okay.
It never
so
gets that high.
Bit more lean to go yet.
Yeah, but it's more like, you have your threshold, like that's where I need to start doing something.
Eric's head goes to mush after a few meetings. I think we all do, don't we? So thanks from Kira. Lots of things resonate. I think there's lots of notes there. As I say, this will all be out on the Dublin Lean Network YouTube channel, so you can. I know Diana was speaking at a rate there, so you might want to go back and listen to some of those bits and pieces, and loads of references in there for you as well. What else have we got here? I mean, obviously you concentrate a lot on meetings, and it is a real time stealer, isn't it? Anybody want to say anything? Chuck a question in? Yeah, Nuala.
Hey, Diana, first of all, loved what you had to say. I've worked in service industry for a long time, so I see it all. I think what's new to me is the explosion of tech options we had that we didn't even have 3 years ago, let alone 5 years ago. And I'm wondering, are you seeing real or actual barriers to their use in any of the larger organizations who maybe are very cautious with AI and governance, all the rest of it? Are you offering solutions and either having people saying I hadn't heard of it, or organizations saying no, it doesn't meet our privacy criteria, for example?
What I'm finding, interestingly enough, is there's a very large company that we work with that everybody would know this brand, right? I won't say who it is that, like they've got a marketing team of close to 60 people. And so the marketing team is like the size of a company, right? A small company. And when we ask about the tech, they go, oh, IT would never let us use that. They'd never let us. And then we go, really? And we speak to IT, and I go, absolutely, show us the use case for it. And they walk through, how could we use it? How can it work? So there's actually, from IT gets a bad rep, when actually particularly IT are the ones that are often, oh no, let's see how we can make things better. They might not use the specific tool that we're recommending, but they'll find something similar. So if it's in a Microsoft environment, they'll say, oh, we've already spent a lot of money on Copilot. But the really good companies will go, do you know what? It's not actually doing what we want just yet. So let's trial this as a pilot, and we'll get 5 people within the group on it, and then see whether or not it'll actually add enough value before we roll it out to others. So the pushback that I would have seen, say, even from, I don't know, let's say 2015 to 2020 from IT is completely changed since 2022. IT are, let's get on board, let's get more adoption here with people.
Good to hear. Thank you. Steve, you muted.
Anybody else? So just a few comments here. So Adam, as a non-marketing manufacturing dude, he found it really interesting, really cool. Thank you. He's gone. The link wouldn't work to access the call for a lot of my colleagues, says Teresa. So there'll have to be a lot more online. They will watch the YouTube channel as soon as it's available. Okay. Not sure what happened to the link there. So we could add more people on the call. What else we got? Thanks so much. Resonated. Great information to share with those on transactional roles and who see waste as production related only. That's a big misconception, isn't it? Anybody else want to jump in?
Is anybody game enough to try it next week?
Try it today.
So a lot of people go, how do I even start? So just start small. So like literally list your meetings, go in and actually list all of your meetings, and then label and rank them, and label, right, which was some of these do I have to do and be in front of, which could actually potentially maybe be replaced. I would say calculate the total cost of your meetings to get some idea of what it is, and then test asynchronous video just for 2 of them, just for 2. And let the other people know that, listen, I'm just going to test something out new, so that they're not just meetings cancelled, they get an asynchronous video instead. You're obviously bringing them on the journey with it. Replace 2 meetings, track your time being saved over a month. And then a really good tip that we have is, if you're rolling this out to your whole team, is reward the time being saved. So we worked with one company who were just fabulous. They really are brilliant. And we saw adoption was quite low. Nobody wanted to get onto a synchronous video. 2 of the senior directors were, but the other people weren't. So we came up with the idea of give them the time off. So if they can prove they saved 3 hours, 7 hours, whatever it is in terms of their project updates and all of that, they get the time off at the end of the month. So we did it last year for a whole month. They were lucky because it was a 31-day month and it happened to be a 5-week month. And whatever time that they showed that they saved, they got the time off. So it's another way of getting, because it's about getting over the hill of, oh, I don't know if I want to do this, because it's so easy to stay safe and stay the way you always worked, rather than trying it, you know, trying to get people to try new things.
Well, 2 o'clock. That was fantastic, Diana. I'm pretty sure we're going to have requests to follow up on this as well. So really thank you for your time. I hope maybe 1 or 2 people might get in touch with you as well. I think it's been really informative. Thanks everybody for attending. I'm not going to keep you any longer than your lunch break. So with that, I will talk to you all very soon. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you very much.
everyone.
Take care, guys.
Thanks so much. Have a great
Thanks,
long
Diana.
weekend.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
You
Thank you,
too.
bye.
Bye.